It's hard for the eye to believe that this, in all its texture and detail, is not a piece of wood. Yet somehow the tree emerging out of geological time makes this stone feel more approachable. For stones, I believe, are always strangers, and yet there's something in us that yearns towards them. People go and gather stones from the wild, or sometimes feel that the stones have found them. They bring them home, they put them on windowsills, on mantelpieces, and too often forget where they came from and what they meant where they were taken away. I think a sense of life closer to us than stone itself, attached to a stone, makes the stone less of a stranger, more approachable. The sense of animal or human contact even more so. It makes that yearning we feel towards them more intimate, more satisfying, more real.
Go inside a stone, that would be my way. Let somebody else become a dove.
Did you always know about the stone?
I did, yeah, I did. I can't really remember my first memory of it though, but I think we always spent a lot of time down here, because you always see something different too, even even though in a sense it's familiar to you, but there's always just the light of the day or the season.
Okay. How do you know it's a buffalo stone?
Well, I think, just from what my dad and my uncle said, and two, just the way this is just so smooth on this side too. It would take more than just a few head of cattle every summer to cause that.
Have they rubbed all the way around it?
No, just this one corner. Yeah, and now,
which I think I'd do if I was that sort of animal.
That's right. And now, because it's not in use, so you get the lichen starting to come on it again too. But
it's quite an interesting rock in itself, isn't it?
It is. It's almost like two pieces.
You don't know what kind it is, do
No,
you?
I don't.
It's so interesting to me that the buffalo are gone, but they're remembered in the name, and their presence is, their signature is still here.
Yeah, right.
God. The lichens on this side.
Yeah, it's really thick over here.
Blue.
Yeah.
Is it just the light this evening? They are blue, aren't
I think they are blue, actually. Yeah. Yeah, a few years ago, there's a fellow, I think his wife was from this area, and he found out there's a rock here. He wanted to buy this and put it on some of his own property and then have a plaque put on it. I said, there's not enough money in the world for me to part with this. So,
have you found artifacts or buffalo skulls or anything washing out here?
Never found any buffalo skulls. We have found the odd arrowhead.
I talked to someone who passionately collects them.
Oh, okay.
And he said it became an addiction and he had to stop.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When mankind builds out of stone, the stone begins with stone's only patience to seek a return to the nature from which it was wrenched or shaped. It becomes part of the landscape again. The straight line is the sign in our times of man's presence in nature, but for the people who came before us, it was the circle, which disappears so much more easily into the landscape. And yet those stones are there still, as the prairie grasses slowly lip over them and the lichens cover their faces, until, in some trick of light, you realize that you are standing where people long ago inhabited the land. The Stone Age cultures left messages for us in the beautiful, enigmatic language of stone itself. Hearing that language and touching that culture is a mixture of a treasure hunt and a strange affirmation of humanity across forgotten ages. To find a stone artifact like this in the grass and to know that a hand touched this, dropped it, laid it down, perhaps 100, perhaps 1,000 years ago, is to touch that hand. It lies, I think, behind the passion that people have for looking for relics of the past. Some of the work is so exquisite that one wonders at the person who made it so long ago and feels a kind of affinity with them. These little cases are of arrowheads, of stone points, collected by a friend of mine in this neighborhood who described to me how it became not just a passion, but an obsession. And after 10 years, he just had to withdraw and stop himself from doing it. And then when he went back to try again, he couldn't find them. He felt that the gift had been taken away. He had enough of them.
Probably one of the most common stones used was a stone called Swan River Chert. But there's also, I guess what's more abundant is Knife River Flint.
Oh, there is
but
flint.
that's coming from, well, it's not really a flint, it's a chalcedony, but it's coming from the Knife River area, and there's some ancient quarry sites there in North Dakota. So and it's spread all over the prairies and right into the boreal forest.
By trading?
By trading, I presume. Archaeology is like tracking ancient hunters, tracking your ancestors through time. So I wanted to see how far back I could track our ancestors here in North America.
Obviously, ancestrally, you're almost entitled to this craft, but it did disappear, didn't it?
Oh, very much so, yeah, for the last, well, I guess since the fur trade, the Hudson Bay Fur Trade Company arriving in North America, bringing, copper and steel goods, I guess. Yeah, the metal arrowheads and knives. And
There were a lot of techniques over the centuries, weren't there?
pretty much. There's variation in styles, and design. And as you go back through time, the techniques are more refined. They seem to be a lot more skilled 10,000 years ago than they were like before the muskets. Really? So yeah. So somehow it's kind of deteriorated a bit. I suppose. I'm not sure why. Probably because of maybe the introduction of the bow and arrow within the last maybe 5,000 years.
I've heard that if you make an obsidian flake, it's sharper than any surgeon's scalpel. Is that
for
true?
sure? Yeah, for sure it is. Yeah, and I notice when I do flint, making the arrowheads and the spear points, if I cut myself, it heals a lot quicker. And actually, a cut from, say, a steel knife or something. This is a basic Knife River Flint knife. So it's a knife blade.
Where did you find it?
Actually, that was given to me. Sometimes people present things to me. And for example, is found near my father's community in northern Manitoba.
Is that a scraper?
It's kind of like a biface, but it looks like an ulo, like an Inuit ulo.
Yeah.
The cutting, for the cutting. So that's what I always call it. And here's the original. This is actually Knife River Flint, but it's patinated. It's been sitting in water. Here's a hide scraper with an obsidian blade. So used for, scraping hides, manufacturing.
It's just an adze?
Or an adze, yeah. It could be used as an adze as well, too. This is my production of Knife River Flint, a Knife River Flint point. But Knife River Flint is really hard to work with, so I imagine the guys back then, the guys working with the stone, had very strong hands. And here are the tines that I would work to do all the pressure flaking.
They're not really shaped. That is the original tine off the antler, right?
So this would be one of the techniques, right, to reduce it. So you see all those flakes coming off of there?
Yes, I do.
Even these tools could be used for reducing even more further, like, more specialized kind of work, that refining or work. And then so you just take all those chips off just by pressure flaking. And you flip back and forth. And that's how you get down to your basic arrowhead shape. In the older, like I said, the older points were much better. They had what they called lateral flaking.
When you say lateral flaking, you mean the flake goes...
It just goes right across.
Right.
Some people use copper, but I try to stay to this, to the older, using the older methods. We try to get them right across, sort of thing, and make the blade as thin as you can, So I'm not too big on the terminologies. I just do it. You know, basically, just do it. So a person should never get stuck in the woods. I always say there's people that can walk into the bush with nothing and then come out with all the tools they need to survive.
Do you think it is important for cultural identity to recover stuff?
Well, I
like
think
that?
so, because I think a lot of people, I find a lot of First Nations don't realize the how refined the work was. Like,
I agree. I mean, I think a lot of the Stone Age cultures were really very sophisticated,
yeah.
but they're regarded as primitive.
you know, I don't think they were any different than we were
No.
10,000 years ago. Yeah.
A Russian convict breaking stones for a roadway in Siberia wrote, "After all, a stone is not born a stone, but a soft, oily creature. A creature, not a thing. A stone becomes a thing in old age." With a different cast of imagination and more subtle tools, a craftsman in stone can make his materials seem, if not soft, at least obedient, and coax into it human images and aspirations, or pretensions, that will outlast the maker.
Well, I mean, the stone is now, it was originally a wild thing. You've made it a human artifact, but already, you know, a spider's built the webs, there are leaves caught up in it.
Yeah.
What'll it look like in 100 years' time?
In 100 years, it'll just look better, kind of. Yeah.
What do you mean by better?
It'll lose some of the polish that's still on the surface. It'll become more granular, more like skin rather than like porcelain, so to speak. Yeah. And the dirt, just from rain and passing over it, will darken it in the recesses, and it'll just get on more of a life of its own.
You sound like you really enjoy the thought of that process, even though you won't be here to see it.
Yeah, it is. It's just because it keeps developing, I suppose.
Yeah. How much work in terms of hours went into that?
About 2 months.
Really?
Yeah.
Fairly solid?
Yeah,
Going
every
at it?
day for 8 hours for 2 months.
Yeah. Are you on the sort of cusp between being a craftsman and an artist when you do something like that?
Yeah, in a piece like this where you have your parameters are set, obviously, so then it's your interpretation of what it is that you're carving. But there's a lot of, obviously it's a lot of craft, of skill-based, and just an accumulation of skills that really haven't changed in 2,000-3,000 years. It's essentially the same tools and the same process. So,
Do you feel a kinship with the people that were working on cathedrals 1,200 years ago?
oh, for sure, the process that they developed is still the process that we use. And there's no better way, and they really refined it. When you spend that many countless hours doing something, you really find the best way to do it. So you get to, get your hands onto the stuff that was done, in this country at the turn of the century, really, and see, because at that time it was still being done very much in the sense as how it was done for the last, 2,000 years. They weren't using a lot of power tools.
Is it cheating to use them? For you, individually?
Not cheating so much. We don't use them, primarily because it just removes you a step from the process, and I think it reflects it in the work. The warmth of the work isn't there.
I'd say 95% of your carving is done with this chisel, a half-inch flat chisel.
Yeah.
In fact, I think up until the 13th century, that's all they used were different sizes of flat chisels. The gouge is a new invention relatively. Yeah. The bullnose is really new.
If you've put two pieces side by side, one that was done entirely by hand, or one that was done with more of a mechanical process, without even really knowing why, we'll be more engaged with the one that was done by hand. We'll look at it longer. We'll remember it. We'll come back to it.
The most traditional things are often actually very revolutionary because what you represent is telling our culture to slow down.
Yeah, enjoy the process. You know, I think that's really what it eventually becomes about. You know, the piece you carve, it gets placed somewhere. Eventually it will decay and either be replaced or not. So it really comes down to the process, and that's why people did it. You know, it was because it took time. It was even probably more so than for the finished product. It was, you know, carving is, it's an accumulation of skills. You know, it took a long time for carving to get to the point where they were doing, you know, the pieces like, you know, the great cathedrals and what have you. And it's important that that knowledge, you know, it was, you know, centuries, millennia of accumulation. So it's important that knowledge get passed on. You know, for it to be lost would be a shame, really.
Do you have any aspirations as an artist?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that's a long-term development. Realistically, you need to spend a decade developing your skills in whatever medium you're going to be using, whether it be, you know, painting or bronze or stone. Like the atelier schooling used to be very focused around that, where, you know, really the first 7 to 10 years is skill development. And watching, and being quiet. And then once you've developed the skills, you know, then start expressing your ideas. And I'm just getting to this stage now where I've been carving long enough that the skills are intuitive and the knowledge is there. If you walk around, you know, Paris or Rome or any of these great cities, you walk through the Louvre, you know, many of the sculptures that people travel from worldwide to see. The Winged Victory, yeah, for a great example. It's an unknown artist. You know, it's not but it's that feeling that's evoked that everybody feels it. You know, the same way. Because, you know, in a short order, you really are forgotten. You know, but, you know, as a person.
Some artists, though, take the stones as they find them, shaped by time and the elements, and see ways to marry them to each other and make something new in nature without changing the stones themselves in any way.
Is this a jigsaw thing for you? I mean, is there a kid fitting stuff?
It totally is, because they're all different. And you think, well, will that one go with that one? Or, you know, how they all fit together. It just depends on the rocks. There's a good bunch right here.
How temporary does it feel, Steve? I mean,
well, some of them...
Could you imagine it staying here for 100 years, or do you know it's not going to do that?
No, not 100 years, but I've had some that stay up for years, a few years. They're in a more protected place.
What do you mean protected? Is wind take it?
Wind,
yeah,
the wind's a big thing, yeah. And the other thing is birds. Like when you put them up top like this, the birds will land on it.
Yeah. Is it feel or is it sight, or is that a silly question?
I tried to do them in the dark, and you can't. You have to have, your eyes have to be involved. But if I want to go up this high, this one has to be really steady. Any little imperfection in the balance it adds on as you go up. So, let's see what else we got here. I like them really precarious.
Good Lord. You're going to make that balance?
Yeah. That one's pretty. That won't stay. See, that first one's not in the right spot. Let's see, I'll try something else here.
Do you remember when you first did this?
Yeah, I do.
When?
95, we were at Green Lake, and there was all this basalt laying around, and it was black, and it had this limestone covering on it, caked on. So it was black and white. It reminded me of my drawings, and I started putting them together in little, little patterns and stuff, and one rock just went click and just stopped. I couldn't believe it. So I had to try it again, and next thing you know, I couldn't stop stacking them because it was just so amazing.
Looking back at yourself as a kid, does it make sense that you'd have discovered this?
Yeah, it does. I was always outside, always looking at nature. Always interested in light and shadow and the textures. And that's always been part of my life. I really like this rock here, but I'm gonna wait on that one. This one's not very stable. I'll do it this way. You can feel when it's in the right spot because they all seem to be joined, and you can... Here, come here, I'll show you. Just put your hand on top here and just feel the movement. See how it's all pretty much connected?
Yeah. Feels like one thing, actually.
Yeah.
Rocking on that one.
Yeah. I should be able to get one more up there. Watch out if it does come down.
Yeah.
They'll
love it.
There you go.
Wow. So when you look at that, is the texture, the surface visual as important as the shape, or?
No, I pretty much let the texture take care of itself. It's the shape of it is, I guess, the thing that gets my attention.
You're making a human mark with natural materials.
Yeah, and it's temporary. It can last 2 minutes, or it can last 2 days or 2 months, but it's temporary. You find art in the strangest places, really.
Do you take records of the stuff you do?
Yeah, I
you
usually
see them as
photograph.
temporary, but do you make them permanent in another way because you're a photographer?
Yeah, I take, and they're very photogenic. Different light on them, rain. When they're wet, they're beautiful. All the colors jump out, and I draw them as well. I'll sit and sketch them.
And you said to me that actually the drawing, the two-dimensional stuff that you do presumably at home, is part of this process.
It really is, yeah.
Why? How?
Well, it's because of the things that interest me about it. The juxtaposition of the light on them, and the shapes of them. They're very organic and sculptural. I mean, it just looks like a rock on the ground, but if you do this to it, it looks like a sculpture. The drawing seems to bring out the essence of the texture and the overall volume of it. Like this, to me, is the oldest form of art that we have. I think that humans have been doing this for tens of thousands of years.
Has anyone started copying you in this valley?
There's quite a few, yeah.
Does that happen everywhere you've done this?
Yes, it does, yeah.
Does that please you or
It
irritate
does,
you?
it totally pleases me because really, anybody can do this. There's nothing special about being able to balance a rock. It's just, once you see it being done, you go, oh, I could do that. I've watched elderly people and little kids this big just try it and be thrilled by it. And to me, that's the connection is with nature. We're going right back to the elemental principles of art and nature here. It's kind of neat. This rock's getting heavy.
I was wondering how long you could hold it. Water and stone define our land, as they shape each other's destinies. But sometimes a human destiny is touched by them too, in crucial and haunting ways. In a low valley much like this, the shepherd boy David chose 5 smooth stones from the creek side, and then, taking one at random, if there is such a thing as random, from his leather purse, he felled the towering Philistine champion. There must be some truth in that story, and if so, the stone that embedded itself in Goliath's brow is lying still somewhere out there in Judah. I wonder if anyone has touched it since, or if the stone has any memories of that flight. And what became of the stones with which Virginia Woolf weighted the pockets of her coat before she waded out to her death? Do they remember? I've no way of knowing if anyone has held this stone before, or if anyone will in the future.
Perhaps it's not dark inside, after all.
The language of stones is heard only in the imagination.
Perhaps there